Welcome everyone to our second webinar on the writing process, Planning to Write. This webinar will address the first phase, planning, understanding assignment instructions, planning and pre-writing, and researching and developing ideas. These are crucial to the writing process because they create the foundation for your paper. What happens if I don't plan? Failing to plan can result in misunderstanding the assignment, difficulty meeting the word count, insufficient or inappropriate research, a disorganized essay structure, missing essay components, body paragraphs out of order or unbalanced, and ultimately a frustrating writing experience. However, planning ensures that the assignment's expectations are met, the essay components are present, the paper has a strong foundation, ideas are well thought out, you know where the paper is going, your deadlines are met, and most importantly, you feel in control of the paper. Let's start at the first step in the planning process, understanding assignment instructions. However, before we get into the assignment, it's important to know the context of this assignment in your degree program. AU has a new service for students called Rubrics. Rubrics is a web-based academic advising program designed to keep you on track for graduation. You can access it through the My AU portal under Manage Your Program. It takes your academic record, organizes it into a plan, and also shows the courses left to complete, but also the courses you have completed and other program requirements. It also allows you to plan out your program if that's the kind of program that you're in. And the reason why this is an important step is because it just gives you that snapshot of your program and where you are in it. Because sometimes when we are focusing on the assignment in front of us, we can lose sight of where we are in our program. So always check in maybe once a semester to see how you are progressing in your degree program. Before getting started on the assignment as well, it's important to understand the course. So first, look at the learning objectives. This is what you are meant to learn in the course, and those elements will be in your assignment. Look at all the assignments and what they're worth. Look at the texts, the documentation style. Is there a final exam? What is the course end date? Find the instructor's email, because that way you can initiate a conversation and ask for questions to clarify perhaps aspects of the assignment instructions that you're unsure about. And ultimately, read the syllabus, which also means the course outline. So now that you've looked at the kind of big picture look and expectations and requirements of the course, now it's time to look at the specific assignment. So as you're going through the assignment instructions, you want to take notes. What's the due date? What's the documentation style? What are the topics of the assignment? Is there research involved? What assignment type is it and how much is it worth? What is the word count? Does it include references or not? Is there a grading sheet or a rubric? Are there readings and how many? Now, this is why we looked at the course outline before we looked at the assignment, because sometimes assignments are connected to other assignments. So if this is the first assignment connected to future assignments, it's good to look at those future assignments to see why this is a foundational assignment and what you need in it to be able to complete the ones that are coming. And of all, ask your tutor if you don't understand. It's important to read the assignment very carefully, looking for direction words. These are verbs that indicate the purpose of the task. So explain, examine, list, identify, justify. List the tasks and questions needed in the assignment. Look for the instructor's recommendations, examples, and preferences. You might even want to print out the assignment so that you can mark it up and make notes in the margins. And look for what's missing. Sometimes something is missing, like let's say the word count, and ask about that so that you go into the assignment process having all of your questions answered. What is that verb trying to say? Just kind of four main types of verbs in assignments. We have informative verbs: describe, explain, summarize, illustrate. These verbs are telling us that we need to provide information. We might have relational verbs: compare, contrast, cause, effect. This is showing us how we want to relate two concepts, or maybe three concepts, to see how they interrelate. We might need to use interpretive verbs: assess, prove, synthesize, analyze. And this way, we demonstrate our critical thinking through an interpretive activity. Or there's an argumentative verb: persuade, convince, position, defend. In this case, we are going to be arguing for a position. So this is not going to be a gray area paper, but a paper with a clear pro and con. There's also different types of writing assignments that you might encounter. I mean, obviously the essay is one of them, but you may have to do a discussion post, a blog post, a wiki entry, a literature review, a summary, a critical review, or a report. But what's really important about all of these different kinds of writing assignments is being aware of the audience, because writing is a transaction between the writer and the reader. So for instance, if I was doing a discussion post, my audience would be peers. Yes, it is being evaluated by an instructor, but my writing is directed at my peers. A reflection paper is directed at myself. I'm reflecting on my own learning. A term paper would be directed to your instructor so that you can demonstrate that you're learning over the course, your competencies and your critical thinking with course content cumulatively. If you're writing a blog post or a wiki entry, you'll be writing to a more general audience. And a word to consider here when thinking about audience is literacy. This doesn't necessarily mean the ability to read or write, but what is their literacy in this discipline? So if you're writing to a general audience, they may not have the literacy of your discipline, so you need to write in more layman's terms. Whereas if you are writing to your instructor, then who is going to be somebody who is quite literate in their field, then you can use more discipline-specific nomenclature and terminology in that case. Connected to this is tone. How we write to someone, who that audience is, kind of determines the tone. So if you're texting a friend, that's a casual interaction, and so it's okay to have more of a casual tone. When you're writing to your instructor, however, you're going to want that tone to be formal. Here's an example of an assignment instruction. I've highlighted the direction words like explain, state, provide, build, demonstrate. This shows you what those different components of the essay are going to require. I've also highlighted the different worth. So in this essay, the introduction is only worth 15%, but the argument is worth 70%. So that's going to be where we really focus our attention on. We can also tell that this assignment is a research essay from the title. But when I'm looking at this essay instructions, I'm noticing a few things missing. Like how many sources, how long is the paper, what's the documentation style? And so I would ask the instructor for clarity. As you're reading through assignment instructions, you might want to pay attention to instructor hints. So hints around style, which is how we write, could be concise or use third person. Hints around presentation or how the paper should look could be use single space or no subheadings. Hints around evidence, which means research or texts, the kind of support for your claims, could be 5 to 7 sources. That gives you a number to work with on how many sources that you need. Instructor preference means tailored requirements, such as put word count on the first page. The instructor might also have suggestions, like I suggest reading this source as a way to inform you that this would be a good idea to read. In this assignment instruction, we're seeing a lot of instructor hints highlighted in blue, such as looking for a line spacing of 1.5, that you cannot go over the word count of 4,000 words, that the footnote should be included in the word count. That's a really important thing to know. Maybe the students need to use a template or a recommended structure, that the methodology section is optional. And this is why it's really important to go through assignment instructions super slowly, even get different highlighters to highlight different things like I've done here. I've highlighted instructor preferences in blue and kind of those key writing tasks in yellow, like developing and providing reasons. And you can come up with your own system, just be consistent with it. Now, your assignment might also come with a rubric or a marking guide, and this is a way that the instructor is going to be evaluating your work. In the case of a rubric, you have a list of criteria, which are in gray. So in this case, it's the quality of analysis, required components, support for ideas, and writing. And then whether or not this person meets expectations, a 4 out of 4, or does not meet expectations, 1 out of 4. So you can see a range there of performance. In this case, each of these criteria are weighed evenly. They're all worth 4 points. But you may have a rubric where it's weighed unevenly, and this can give you an idea of where you really need to focus on. And while writing is important, it's also more devalued in this rubric, whereas quality of analysis is more important. Let's move on to planning and pre-writing. Planning an assignment is not only planning what you're going to write, but how you're going to get it done. And managing your time is a key step here. If you are not given a due date, you can create your own due date using an assignment calculator. An assignment calculator is on the web. It's usually through a university, where you type in or select from a drop-down menu your assignment style. Let's say it's a research paper. You put in your start date, which may be, let's say it's today, and your due date, 3 weeks from now, and you hit enter. And what it does is it breaks down the major components of that paper into tasks that you need to complete over the next 3 weeks. It may not be entirely perfect, but it's a good guide at breaking something big down into smaller, achievable tasks. You can then take these deadlines and put them into your calendar. I call it an infinity calendar online because it does go into infinity. Just write in those dates. And even if you use print, whichever one you realistically use, that will be your calendar for your academics. And that way you can keep track of the deadlines that you've set. Just remember to be realistic. Don't be conservative with your deadlines. Don't say, okay, I'm going to do this in a week, and the next one in a week, and the next one in a week, and then I'm done the course. Because that's not realistic. Things take time, and there's also life and illness that happen that can add more time to our deadlines. And so how much time to plan for? Well, it depends on the assignment, but generally 1 to 2 weeks per phase of the writing process, with extra time at the end. So for a 1,000 word essay, a week for planning, a week for drafting, a week for polishing, plus extra time is basically a month. Well, what takes up all this extra time? What if I want to do the whole course in a week, the whole assignment in a week? Well, there are activities that really use up a lot of time, and research is one of them. Trying out search words, looking up, articles through the databases can be very frustrating, especially if it doesn't yield any ideal results. As well, interacting with librarians is very helpful, but then you're also needing to factor in response time and turnaround for your questions. Reading is time consuming, and coming up with a topic can be very overwhelming, especially if there's a lot of concepts to cover in this assignment. How do you come up with a topic? This can be a frustrating experience, but something we can help you with at the right site. Creating an outline is time consuming, but really worth it. And when it comes to writing, if you give yourself too lofty of a goal, like 700 words I'm going to write today, and you only get 350 done, well, you're going to have to compensate for that time as the week goes on. Polishing, if you have a reader or you're using the right site, there's going to be feedback turnaround time you have to factor into your plans. You also don't want to rush this phase because you want to just leave it alone for a couple of days so you can return to the paper with fresh eyes. So factor all of this in when you're creating your schedules, as well as people getting sick, having life events you have to attend, just plain old life happens. Because that way, if you give yourself more room, if you finish early, that's great. You just don't want to get to your deadline and still have more to do because you were too conservative with the schedule. In terms of task management, you can use the assignment calculator as we just talked about. You can also use an Eisenhower method, which helps you label your tasks according to urgent, which needs to be dealt with now, and important. It's important, but it's not urgent. You can also use Evernote, and this is an online note-taking app, and you can create task lists and checklists and calendars to keep track of all the components of the assignment that you need to target. As you're coming up with goals for your assignments, keep in mind the SMART method, that the goal should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So for instance, for planning a paper, you want to make sure that you're reading those specific assignment instructions so that you understand what's needed. And then when it comes to managing your time, you want to use a measurable, achievable, and realistic schedule. Know yourself. Schedule realistically so that you don't paint yourself into a corner. And always give yourself deadlines for these tasks. The assignment calculator will do it for you. But don't give yourself deadlines that are unrealistic, because then it's just going to lead to frustration, submitting a paper that's not ready to be submitted, and procrastination. So what is pre-writing? This is where, to get started on the paper, we start generating ideas, making connections, considering the context of the topic. Is this a current issue? What are the problems? What are the solutions? You may look at the topic in your assignment instructions and already have an idea of what the solution would be, or how to fix that problem, or what an oversight is. Maybe you can think about ways that you can incorporate creativity or your personal or professional experience. These can all help kind of get the assignment started. You may be open to brainstorming. This might be frustrating for people who find this too abstract, but when we're in idea generating mode, it is a little bit unstructured. And this is a way for our brains to make those necessary connections before we get into the paper. There's different kinds of brainstorming. There's brain writing, where you just write ideas on sticky notes and you just move them around in whatever order makes sense. Similar to mind maps, we're going to create connections between those ideas. There's free writing, free talking, and bouncing ideas off of friends. And what this means is just unstructured writing down just your general feelings and impressions from the assignment, or talking to somebody about what the assignment's about and just kind of generating ideas and seeing what they say, bouncing ideas off of them. You may also want to think about the 5 whys to crystallize the purpose of your paper. For instance, the topic is important, but why? And why today? And brain netting. Brain netting is a collaborative process where you work with a group to come up with collaborative ideas. But if none of these really appeal to you, you can always come to a Right Site coach with your initial ideas, and we can help kind of stand in for that friend in a way to bounce ideas off of and to help you come up with some initial concrete ideas to go from. Once you have thought up these ideas and impressions and feelings about a topic, now it's time to kind of sort them into groups. You can sort them into categories or themes, or you can think about how they interact. And this initial sorting activity these could eventually become body paragraphs or sections of a paper. Now that you have those initial ideas and those initial connections made, it's time to move into the research process, to take those ideas and to turn it into a concrete purpose for your paper. So the research process may not be suitable for every assignment, but essentially it begins with figuring out what your topic is or what your research question is going to be for the paper. From here, you're going to take that question or topic and go and search the library with your keywords so that you can figure out the articles that you need for this paper. As you are searching, organize your articles at the same time. This way they're going to be easier to locate down the road. When you're reading, you also want to note take at the same time. You want to just write down maybe potential quotes, impressions, keywords, phrases, passages. As you read and note take, just take the citation and put it in a Word document. You can format them later, but that way you don't have to go and track down the citation, try and think what was the title of that paper. It just keeps everything nice and organized. When you're done reading, draw conclusions from your research, and these conclusions will inform the purpose of your assignment. So let's look at these in more detail. Take your sorted pre-writing and your research questions and make a list of keywords that you can use to search for articles. So this could be from terminology, theories, issues, scholars, the time span, pros and cons. You also want to think about phrasing terms in different ways. If you only look up online learning, you might miss a bunch of articles that refer to online learning as remote learning, distance education, distributed learning, open learning. So try and think of different ways to say the same thing. That just opens up your search capacity. When you're working with the library, email the librarians for support if you have questions, and also check out their guides, tutorials, and webinars. On their website, they have so many of these targeting the issues like planning research, finding materials, evaluating sources, citing. They also have subject guides and webinars. Now, that can help you. Another webinar that can help you are webinars on citation managers. This may be overkill for your paper, but if your paper is using a lot of citations, then you might want to consider using a citation manager. Two of the most common ones are Zotero and Mendeley. These basically, you add an extension to your browser. So when you read an article, you click on it and it saves it to this database. You can then go into the database and organize them according to whatever you need. So in this image here, I've created some folders that I can then sort the articles according to theme. The best way to get started with one of these is to use an AU library guide. I was just talking about the webinars in the previous slide, because you really do need support getting used to these in the beginning because they're very, very complex. As well, if you need qualitative or quantitative software for advanced research, that could be something to consult with a supervisor. But if this is all too much for what could be a relatively simple paper, only using, let's say, 1 to 3 sources, then maybe you want to create a bookmark folder on your browser where you can keep them all, or create a folder with PDFs on your computer. You just want to be able to access the sources quickly so that you're not wasting time trying to track them down. As you do your research, consider keeping a research journal. It doesn't have to be formal, and you set the rules, but it's just ultimately a log that you can use to track your activities, date the page, use point form, and track things like the search words you've tried. Were they successful or not successful? Maybe track your results or your impressions, your reflections. What if you see the same term used or the same writer referenced from paper to paper to paper? That might be somebody to pay attention to red flag, and you can put that in your journal. And what this does is that the next time you go to research, you can refer to what you did the day before, and then you don't have to repeat or do anything the second time. It just helps keep a really, really concise log of your activities that can actually help you with your paper. Here are some tips for researching. And these are general tips because it really does depend on your assignment. But generally, you're looking for timely research. Of course, there are those older articles that are really important to include. But generally, you're looking for timeliness. What does that mean? Well, it could mean within the 5 to 7 year mark. Maybe it means post-COVID. That might be a good question to ask your tutor. You also want to prioritize digital articles that come with a URL or a DOI. That's a common way of finding research. That's not to say academic books aren't helpful, and they do have their place. Ultimately, though, you want to make sure wherever you're getting your source that it's credible, that they're an expert in their field, and where they are publishing their thoughts is peer-reviewed or a legitimate educational source. What about texts that are not academic? Well, you can use government websites, university web pages, organizational web pages that contain general information. You're just not looking for anything that's opinion-based. So avoid Wikipedia, personal blogs, personal YouTube channels, avoid undergraduate essays in magazines, and avoid for-profit sources. Remember to cite as you go. So every article that you read, you want to take that citation and put it in a references page, format it later, but this way it's easy to track down the article in question. Especially if they come with a link, then you can just click on the link in your references. It'll take you directly to the source. After you've completed your research, you might want to make a mind map, and it doesn't have to be fancy and technology and online. It can just be a pen and paper where you're just basically itemizing the major ideas or themes, how they interconnect, what does this research indicate, what conclusions can be made, and what story does the research tell. What you might find in creating mind maps like this is that you might come up with 4, let's say, sub-themes, but maybe one of them doesn't really match the other 3. And so you can cross that off. It just helps to kind of streamline what you're going to be focusing on in your paper. And you might then also want to come up with sub-themes for each of these. And that can help you figure out what you're going to address in those body paragraphs. You don't have to use mind maps, though, to draw conclusions. You can also look at it in terms of time. You can create a timeline or a chronology. Or maybe you want it to be more like a story, where it's beginning, middle, and end, or past, present, and future research. If you're dealing with a compare and contrast essay, a Venn diagram might come in handy, where you look at similarities and differences and then the significance in the middle, that crossover point. You might also want to look at a funnel structure, where we look at how the research we've figured out, how that can create that specific details and evidence that come up in the middle of your paper. Use these conclusions to determine the purpose of the paper. What is your message? What is your paper going to say? Are you pro? Are you con? And then go back to the assignment instructions and look for those action verbs. Are you being asked to inform, interpret, relate, and argue? You also want to adapt the research process to your assignment. So if you're in the arts, it tends to be more qualitative and human-centered. If you're in English, you might not need other sources. You just are only interacting with the text. In sciences and the human professions, you might need to learn the language of assignments, such as methodology, literature review, recommendations, limitations. So that kind of wraps up the planning phase, where we understood our assignment instructions, went into planning and pre-writing to generate some ideas, and then applied those ideas to research, started developing those ideas into connections that we can then explore through the drafting phase of the paper.